Hey, so first of all, give us the reaction out there. Klint Kubiak, was he a popular guy, or Saints fans going, oh no, now what? Or were they like good riddance, or were they somewhere in between? What's the reaction to his departure?
Yeah, I think he was well liked. Maybe somewhere in between, in the sense that I think Saints fans down here are ready for changes across the board with their coaching staff. But if the Saints weren't as bad as they were last season, and they hadn't fired and really kind of tried to clean house, I think Kubiak would very much have a job. The struggles that New Orleans had last season, I don't really think were his fault. I mean, they dealt with so many injuries on the offensive line, particularly quarterback Derek Carr missed 7 games, and they failed to win any of the games that he didn't play in. And so, I think Kubiak did some creative stuff, some solid stuff with the cards that he was dealt. But just because there was a coaching change and things are so much up in the air here, he was allowed to look for other work, and he found something.
A lot of people say, because he's been a passing coordinator in the past, and, they obviously were trying to throw it more towards the end of the season. But you go and look at the first 4 games. They rushed for 180 yards against the Panthers, 190 against the Cowboys. They run into, obviously, Philadelphia the next game where it's 89, but a close game. They lose by 3. Atlanta, they put 131 yards on the ground as well. What is that his philosophy? Is it to run first? What kind of coach is he from a philosophical standpoint?
Yeah, I think that was very much what the Saints' identity tried to be, was run first, play action, a lot of motion. Get ready for that. In terms of, they got away from play action in the run game a little bit later in the year because they were falling behind so often in these games. But the first 4, I did think really did speak to his identity. He got a lot out of Alvin Kamara, who had enjoyed kind of a nice bounce back season. He finished with a career high 950 yards. Taysom Hill was really important to their run game. Also was injured later in the season, but Kubiak used him in all sorts of creative ways, as a fullback, as a tight end, as a receiver. Obviously he's a former quarterback, so they used him there as well on occasion. He just found really good ways to kind of use the pieces that he had. And I think maybe the one knock against Kubiak, I'm sure maybe we'll get to it, is that, once they started to fall behind in these games or in the second half, did he have the answers to adjust? Did teams start to figure out what he was doing? I think kind of maybe those are some fair questions, but I think he approaches these games with really solid strategies and sound plans, and he seemed to get a lot out of the players.
Well, when you look at that, and again, that probably a lot of coaches struggle when they get behind and they're forced to throw it. But when you say maybe didn't have the ideas to pull themselves from that, do you put that maybe more on just the amount of injuries you guys had, or was that even before that?
Yeah, I would say it was mostly the injuries, but the Philadelphia game in those first 3 ones was actually pretty interesting. Philadelphia went really heavy to stop the run with a 6-1 front, and really shut down New Orleans' run game. And so, what did they try and do once that happened? Well, Kubiak just stuck with the run mostly still. And, they were winning most of that game. It was a close game. So I understood the process why he stuck with it. But I know a lot of Saints fans were frustrated in the moment with that. But the first 2 weeks are what sticks out around everyone's minds here. Is they put up back-to-back 40-point performances. They came storming out of the gates, and it was a really impressive showing to begin the season.
So what did this team ultimately, what was the expectation, I guess, coming out of the offseason? Was the expectation this is a talented roster before injuries, obviously, and this should be a playoff contender? Or do you feel like this is a team that was kind of middling, and then the injuries brought them down to where they were, which was a 5-win team?
Yeah, I think it was pretty interesting that, Saints fans are really down on this team. I think entering the season that Dennis Allen was not a popular figure here by any means. And so, I think most people expected them to be maybe in the 7-win range, that 10 if things go well, trying to compete for the division. And then the first 2 weeks happened, and fans started to buy back in. I think they bought into what they saw, and then things just kind of fell off the rails. And I mentioned the injuries, but I don't necessarily think it was all that too. There were things that happened last season. I mean, the types of players getting hurt, a lot of their older players got hurt. Just some bad luck, but that this is a Saints team that was kind of boom or bust, and they went bust.
When you look at Kubiak, just maybe how he does his personnel groupings, is there a team out there that you would be most close to emulating?
Well, I mean, pretty much all the league, because it seems like everyone wants to run this Shanahan style of offense right now that is so in vogue. But, obviously he spent time with Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers before this past season, just as their pass game coordinator with the 49ers. I think a lot of different sides there. But, I think the 2000s Texans teams where his dad, Gary Kubiak, was the coach of, that identity is very familiar to Klint. The 2020s Minnesota Vikings, you're going to see a lot of wide zone run schemes, play action boots. Like, this offense has taken the league by storm. And Klint he grew up in the system, and I think he's very comfortable in it.
What was his relationship with the players like? Did you get much of a sense of how they felt about it? Even just, I know Carr was injured, as you mentioned, for a number of games, and he had to work with Spencer Rattler and others like that. But just in terms of how he handled the injuries, how he dealt with players through what was ultimately a very tough season, what was that relationship like?
Yeah, I think they generally liked him. They never got the sense that he made excuses for any of the injuries at stake. Something you would hear over and over is his accountability and attention to detail. I think he was pretty well liked, and it's funny because he doesn't have the most energetic personality, to put it kindly. I mean, he's a pretty boring dude, just if you kind of talk to him, and I think he would say that as well. I mean, he's a very nice person, but he doesn't have the most eccentric personality, but I think it still connects with players, and he's able to get a lot out of them. And, Derek Carr always mentioned kind of how Klint would help make the game easier for him with some of these pure progression passing schemes. Just he tried to take things off the quarterback's plate to help the offense elsewhere.
When they fired Coach Allen in the middle of the year, did his role, talking about Kubiak, did his role change? Did he become more of that leader for the team? Obviously for the offensive side, but I'm just curious if that role changed at all for him.
No, not necessarily, I don't think. I mean, they named Darren Rizzi, who's their special teams coordinator, the interim. That was going to be the choice all along. I don't think Klint was ever in consideration to be the head coach, for instance. So, they gave him a lot of trust to build that offense, though. Like, if you go back to the last offseason, they didn't just hire Klint Kubiak, but Kubiak was able to bring with him an offensive line coach, a quarterbacks coach, wide receivers. He brought in a lot of guys that he knew, like John Benton. They worked together, I believe, or they didn't work together, but they knew each other from Houston. And Andrew Janoko was their quarterbacks coach in Minnesota with Klint Kubiak. So it's guys that he knew, and he was able to have some say in sort of hirings and those sorts of things.
Well, that's an interesting point you brought up with John Benton as well, because he was San Francisco O-line coach, a few years back also. They're together last year, talking about him and Kubiak. Are there any rumors? Because we don't know what's going to happen with the offensive line coach here. We've got Scott Huff. I think he's still on the staff, but I don't know if you're hearing any rumors there.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure what's happening with some of the assistants. I mean, obviously, New Orleans still needs a head coach, so that's where most of the attention has been down here.
Hey, just out of curiosity, with the team there in the quarterback spot, I'm wondering what the plan is. We're out here, and everybody's debating about Geno. Should he be the guy? Should they move on from him? And it comes down to, all right, well, if you move on, who's the guy, and I think that's true in a lot of different instances. What's the feeling out there? Do they feel like, all right, Spencer Rattler's the future? Do they, Jake Haener? I know you brought up Taysom Hill. I know he's not really used as a quarterback much these days, but what's the feeling quarterback-wise out there?
Well, am I the fans or the team in this sort of scenario?
I guess the team would probably be more important in this situation, yeah.
Okay, yes. Yeah, so the team, it'll be interesting. I mean, if they want to move on from Derek Carr, it's the way his contract is structured. I mean, it only saves $1 million against the cap, and they would have to eat $50 million in dead money if they did it as a pre-June 1 release. Now, New Orleans is in a very challenging salary cap situation. They're $50 million over the cap as it is, and so they could do it. They could move on from him. It's just whether that's it's something they would either want to do now or later. I think the next coach will have a lot of say in that direction of whether he wants to work with a guy like Derek Carr. But I think they're open to it, but I don't know. I don't think they've necessarily made up their mind in that scenario.
Matthew Paris, Saints beat writer for the Times-Picayune and the New Orleans Advocate, has been our guest here with Wyman and Bob. Matthew, thanks so much for taking the time. We really appreciate the insight.
Hey, appreciate it. Thank you.